There's a wardrobe sitting in a skip outside a Victorian terrace in Leeds right now. Solid oak, dovetail joints, probably 90 years old. And in 6 months, that exact same style of wardrobe will be selling for $1,200 in a boutique on the King's Road, sanded back, waxed, and labeled reclaimed heritage furniture. That's not a coincidence, that's a trend. And if you own a house full of old wooden furniture, you are sitting on more value than you think. Across Britain right now, something is happening in home renovation that most people haven't clocked yet. Homeowners are ripping out flat-pack kitchens, glossy laminate floors, and mass-produced MDF furniture. And they're replacing it all with timber, reclaimed timber, restored timber, old, honest, solid wood that's been given a second life instead of a trip to landfill. Interior designers are calling it the biggest shift in British home style since the grey and white minimalist wave a decade ago. And unlike most trends, this one isn't about buying something new, it's about saving something old. I've spent years restoring furniture professionally, and I want to walk you through exactly why this is happening, what's driving it, and how you can be part of it, whether that's rescuing a single chair from your loft or transforming an entire room. Because underneath the Instagram photos and the interior magazine spreads, there's a genuinely practical story here about waste, cost, craftsmanship, and why the wood sitting in your garage might be worth more than anything you'd buy at a big retailer. Let's start with the problem, because every trend starts with a problem people are trying to solve. For the best part of 30 years, British homes have been filled with cheap furniture. Chipboard wardrobes with a plastic veneer stuck on top. Flat-pack bookshelves that sag within 2 years. Laminate flooring that looks fine in photos and terrible in person once the light catches it. It was affordable, it was quick, and for a while it made sense, but it doesn't last. Chipboard swells the moment it meets damp. Veneer peels at the corners. Cheap glue joints fail, and when it breaks, there's no fixing it. You throw it away and buy another one. That cycle has caught up with people. Landfill costs have gone up. Furniture disposal fees from local councils have gone up. And more importantly, people have started noticing that their grandparents' furniture, the stuff sitting untouched in a spare room or a shed, is still standing strong after 50 or 60 years, while the sideboard they bought 5 years ago is falling apart at the joints. That contrast is the whole story. Old solid wood furniture was built to be repaired, not replaced. It was made from timber that was properly seasoned, joined with real joinery rather than staples and glue, and finished with materials that could be restored again and again. When something with that kind of construction gets damaged, it's not rubbish, it's a project. So why has restoration specifically become the trend, rather than just buying reclaimed wood new? Because people have realized that most of what needs doing to bring old timber back to life is genuinely simple, genuinely satisfying, and genuinely cheap. You don't need a workshop full of expensive machinery. You need a few basic tools, an afternoon, and a bit of patience. Now, before you can restore anything, you need to understand what you're actually looking at. Because timber damage isn't all the same, and treating the wrong problem the wrong way is where most beginners go wrong. The first thing to check is cracks. Cracks usually appear along the grain, running the length of a board, and they're caused by the wood drying out and shrinking unevenly, especially in centrally heated homes where humidity swings between seasons. A hairline crack is cosmetic. A crack that runs deep through a structural piece like a chair leg or a table rail is a different matter and needs proper repair before the piece takes any weight. Next, loose joints. Pick up an old chair and give it a gentle wobble. If you hear a creak or feel movement where the legs meet the seat, that's a loose joint, and it's one of the most common issues in antique furniture. Old hide glue, which was standard for most of the 20th century and earlier, becomes brittle over decades and eventually lets go. The good news is that loose joints are one of the easiest and most satisfying repairs you can do. Then there's missing wood. Sometimes a corner is broken clean off, or a piece of molding is snapped away entirely. This needs either a replacement piece cut from matching timber or a filler repair, depending on how visible and how structural the missing section is. Water damage shows up as dark staining, swelling, or a soft, spongy feel when you press the wood. This is common on anything that's lived near a window, a radiator, or in a garden shed with a leaky roof. Water damage can range from a simple surface stain you sand out to serious rot that's compromised the wood's strength. Speaking of rot, this is the one that scares people off the most, but it's rarely as bad as it looks. Press a screwdriver gently into the suspect area. If it's firm, you're dealing with surface decay that can be treated. If it sinks in easily and the wood crumbles, you're looking at active rot that needs to be cut out entirely before it spreads further. Paint damage and old varnish are usually the easiest fix of all. Peeling paint, cracked lacquer, or a finish that's gone cloudy and dull doesn't mean the wood underneath is damaged. 9 times out of 10, what looks like a ruined piece of furniture is actually a perfectly sound piece of timber wearing a 50-year-old coat that's simply had enough. Scratches, obviously, are the mildest issue on this list, but they're worth mentioning because deep scratches that go through the finish and into the bare wood need to be treated differently to surface scuffs that only affect the top coat. Broken legs are more serious, but even a snapped leg can usually be repaired with the right glue, a dowel reinforcement, and clamping, rather than needing an entirely new leg turned on a lathe. And finally, loose glue joints throughout a piece, not just at the legs, but at drawer corners, panel edges, and frame joints, tend to be the difference between a piece that wobbles and creaks its way through another decade and one that's solid enough to hand down to your own children. There's one more thing worth checking before you write any piece off, and that's the wood species itself. Run your hand along an unfinished edge, underneath a drawer, or on the inside of a carcass, somewhere the original wood hasn't been painted or varnished. Oak has a coarse, open grain you can genuinely feel under your fingertips. Pine is soft, pale, and will dent if you press a fingernail into it. Mahogany has a tight, reddish-brown grain with a subtle shimmer when light hits it at an angle. Knowing what you're working with changes almost every decision that follows, from which glue will bond best to how much sanding the wood can actually tolerate before you sand straight through a thin veneer layer, which is a genuinely easy mistake to make on anything built after around 1950, when solid timber construction started giving way to veneered boards even in reasonably good furniture. It's also worth understanding why so much of this old furniture survives in the first place, because it explains why restoration works so well on it. Furniture built before the 1960s, particularly anything made in Britain during the Victorian and Edwardian periods, was constructed from timber that had been air-dried for years before it was ever cut, which meant the wood had already done most of its shrinking and warping before it became a chair or a table. Compare that to a lot of modern furniture, which uses kiln-dried timber dried in a fraction of the time, or engineered boards that are stable in the short term but simply aren't designed to be repaired when they eventually fail. That's the real difference between old and new. Old furniture was built with the expectation that someone, one day, would need to fix it. Modern flat-pack furniture was built with the expectation that you'd throw it away. Once you've properly inspected the piece and understood what you're dealing with, the actual restoration process follows a logical order, and skipping steps is the number one reason DIY restorations go wrong. Start with cleaning. Before you touch sandpaper or a stripper, wipe the whole piece down with a mild solution of warm water and a small amount of washing up liquid, using a soft cloth. Diaz removes decades of dust, grime, and surface wax that would otherwise clog your sandpaper and interfere with any stripping product you use later. Let it dry fully before moving on, ideally overnight in a well-ventilated room. Next comes removing the old finish. This is where a lot of restorers reach straight for an electric sander, and I'd urge you not to. Sanding through decades-old varnish creates a lot of fine dust, and on furniture made before around 1960, there's a real chance the original paint contains lead, which is genuinely dangerous to breathe in or inhale as dust. Instead, use a proper furniture stripper, applied with a brush, left to sit for the time stated on the tin, then removed with a scraper and fine wire wool. Always work in a ventilated space and always wear gloves and a proper respirator mask, not just a builder's dust masqué, because stripper fumes and lead dust are a genuinely serious health risk that too many DIY guides gloss over. Once the old finish is off, you move to sanding, and this is where grit selection matters enormously. Start with somewhere around 100 to 120 grit to remove any remaining residue and level out minor imperfections. Hen move to 150, and finish with 220 grit for a smooth surface that's ready to accept stain or finish. Always sand in the direction of the grain, never cross it, because cross-grain scratches will show up glaringly once you apply a stain, especially on lighter woods like pine or ash. With the surface prepared, you can address any structural repairs. For cracks, a good quality wood glue, worked into the crack with a thin palette knife or an old credit card, then clamped overnight, will close most cracks completely. For genuinely wide gaps, a 2-part epoxy wood filler is the better choice because, unlike standard wood filler, epoxy actually bonds structurally to the timber and can be sanded, stained, and shaped once cured. This is an important distinction that a lot of guides get wrong. Standard wood filler is cosmetic and will eventually crack out again under stress, while epoxy becomes part of the structure itself. For loose joints, this is genuinely one of the most rewarding repairs in furniture restoration. You gently work the joint apart as far as it'll safely go, scrape out every trace of the old brittle glue, apply fresh wood glue into the joint, and clamp it firmly for the time specified on the glue, usually somewhere between 1 and 24 hours, depending on the product. A joint that's been wobbling for 15 years can be made completely solid again in an afternoon, and there's something genuinely satisfying about feeling a chair go from rickety to rock solid in your hands. When it comes to replacing damaged wood entirely, whether that's a snapped section of molding or a rotted chair rail, the goal is always to match the grain direction, TE species if possible, and the thickness of the original timber. It doesn't need to be a perfect species match for most projects. since staining can bring two different woods much closer in tone, but grain direction matters enormously for both strength and appearance. Once every repair has cured and been sanded flush, you move to staining if the piece needs it. Always test your stain on an off-cut or a hidden section first, like the underside of a drawer or the inside of a leg, because the same stain can look dramatically different depending on the wood species and how absorbent it is. Apply with a clean cloth or brush, working with the grain, and wipe away the excess after a few minutes rather than letting it pool, which causes blotchy, uneven color. After staining comes sealing, and this is the step that actually protects everything you've just done. For furniture that'll see daily use, like a dining table or a desk, a hard-wearing finish such as a water-based polyurethane or a traditional oil-based varnish gives real protection against spills, heat, and scratches. For pieces that are more decorative, a wax finish gives a beautiful, soft sheen and is easier to touch up in future, though it offers less protection against water and heat. The final step is polish, and this is genuinely where a piece goes from restored to transformed. A good coat of furniture wax, buffed in with a soft cloth in small circular motions, and then buffed again along the grain for the final shine, brings out depth in the wood that simply isn't visible in any of the earlier stages. This is the moment where the transformation actually becomes visible, and it's worth taking your time over. Throughout all of this, there are a few professional tricks worth knowing. When gluing a joint, always do a dry run first, clamping the piece together without glue to check that everything lines up and that you have the right clamps ready. Because wood glue starts setting within minutes, and there's no time to go hunting for another clamp once it's applied. When filling large gaps, build epoxy filler up in thin layers rather than one thick pour, which prevents it from sagging or cracking as it cures. And when matching an old stain color, always mix your own shade from a base stain rather than relying on a single tin matching perfectly, because wood ages and darkens naturally over decades in a way no shop-bought stain replicates on its own. There are common mistakes too, and it's worth naming them plainly so you can avoid them. Rushing the drying time on glue is probably the single biggest cause of failed repairs, because a joint that looks solid after an hour can still fail under load if it hasn't fully cured. Using too coarse a sandpaper grit too early leaves scratches that show through the final finish, and skipping the cleaning step before stripping means grime gets trapped under the new finish, which shows up as dullness within weeks. Let me give you a real example of how all of this comes together, because it's easy to talk about steps in the abstract, and harder to see how they play out on an actual piece. I once worked on a mid-century sideboard that had spent about a decade in a damp garage. The veneer had lifted along one entire edge,